Well, welcome to the first episode of our podcast. Today, we've got a great show for you with a very experienced guest. We're going to be talking about the power of influence and specifically how to make impact without a big title, which is kind of weird because she's got a big title, but we'll get to that in a moment. Joining us today and sharing her experience is the amazing Jessica Trumble. So before I hand over to Jess, I'm going to give you a little bit of a quick snapshot of her career and background. She has a bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's in HR and org development. Funnily enough, she started her career in property management before stepping into her first HR role at media company Adconian. She then held several senior positions at Amobi. I'm not sure if I said that right, before taking on the foundational head of people and culture role at Tribe. Then about 6.5 years ago, Jess had a brain snap and took a big leap of faith and founded We Are Charlotte, where she's both the founder and CEO today. So welcome to the podcast, Jess.
Thanks, Dave. My gosh, taking me a trip down memory lane. I think I'd forgotten about some of that university stuff, but
I'm sure you put it into practice all the time. Hey, tell me, before we jump into the topic that we're going to be talking about, We Are Charlotte. Tell us, what does that name mean? Where does that come from?
Sure. It was a fair way into that 6.5 year period where I won't go into too much detail, but the business that I run today, I certainly never intentionally set out to create. I did fall into it. It was definitely enabled by COVID as well. And so we were about 18 months in and we are doing outsourced HR, acting as the people team for small business and startup businesses. And a person working in my team at the time said, I think we need a name, and I'm like, oh, okay. And so we went through this whole exercise of trying to come up with something. I didn't want it to sound HR-y. I didn't want it to sound, sort of have those traditional connotations that HR can. And if you look at a lot of outsourced HR companies back then, it was very traditional. And I said, I wanted it to be memorable. I think my brief sounds quite arrogant. I want to be like Uber, just in the sense of like the name has a bit of mystery about it. But, in reality, it has more sense. And so as we were talking about what we do and how we work, I said, we're the people behind the scenes doing the work that really enables teams, to thrive and to do what they're meant to do. And then that flowed into we're the people behind the scenes weaving the webs that bring teams together, which flowed into taking inspiration from the children's book Charlotte's Web. And so that's where We Are Charlotte came from. Originally the business was called Charlotte and everyone thought my name was Charlotte or my daughter's name was Charlotte. And then as I started hiring employees, I thought, all right, well, we better add a We Are on the front of it. And then that's how it all came together. So it's a bit of a random story, but
that's a good story. Like I said, today we're going to be talking about the power of influence and trying to make an impact with a big title. Now, you obviously have a big title now, but there was some time in your career where you didn't always have that title. So maybe I think we've learned a little bit about you, but tell us a little bit more around where you sit in the business, obviously a CEO, and what kind of influence do you think you've been able to build from there?
Yeah, sure. Look, I will fully acknowledge that having that title certainly does give you a bit of an advantage on the maybe gravitas front, but I still remember the day that I changed my title to that. And I just remember thinking like, oh, as if I'm a CEO, I still barely feel like that today. And so, it's one thing to have the title, but then to actually believe that you have the status or the credibility to actually like truly influence from that level is they are two different things. And so whilst absolutely it probably does give me somewhat of an advantage when I'm connecting with people or asking for people's time, they're probably more willing to, hear from me. It also puts you in bigger conversations. And just because my title's CEO, if I'm engaging, we're a consulting business, so engaging with clients, sometimes the CEOs or the chief people officers or the people I'm working with are heading up massive organizations. And so very quickly my little, imposter syndrome brain is very much leveling me out. So yes, the title has certainly helped, but I think far more my influence has come from the way in which I build rapport and build relationships. And I'd say that's probably been the way that I've built influence throughout my career is to try and break down the hierarchical barriers that can come from, seniority and hierarchy in business, and actually just connect with people at a human level. Because I find if you can break that initial
Wall down.
awkwardness or a wall, exactly what would be a really good way to put it, then you can really cut through. And it's funny, the more senior people you deal with, you have to remember everyone is treating them like that. And so sometimes I think they find it super rewarding from their perspective to actually just be treated like a human. And that's certainly what I've found over the last few years tends to work really well.
Yeah, I've always thought that, the more senior you become, the more lonely it is. So for example, in my role, there's other people at the same level that I can go to in my business, and then I report up to a CEO. And so I can sort of bounce ideas off my colleagues before I get to the CEO.
Yes.
But I think the CEO doesn't have that in the organization, that there's maybe it's a misnomer, but they're having to think that they have to have the answers, or at least that people are looking to them for direction all the time, and they need to show it sort of in a way. So I'm always imagine that CEOs reaching out to other CEOs and other businesses as a really welcome conversation. It's like, oh, you're dealing with the same stuff, whether it's bigger or smaller. You are going to be navigating the same kind of choppy water.
Yeah, no, that is very true. And I do think there's a balance you can strike. You absolutely have to, and I didn't have that. I really just sort of put my head down and started building this business, and really had no one other than my partner who, he runs his own business too. So that was handy to sort of have each other to bounce off, but also probably gets a bit tired of hearing me talk about whatever is going on in my day. And so I've really actively sought that out, both through professional advisor relationships, so like actually engaging people to work with me and alongside me on the business, but also that community, which can be both in the form of CEOs, but also executive leaders too. At the same time, though, you shouldn't discount that you can still find support in your organization, even
100%.
whatever level of seniority you are, whoever might be sitting alongside you, or if they're reporting into you. My team are phenomenal. And I think I've always been, I joke that probably like far too open and vulnerable sometimes with the team. So I think there's a line where you have to recognize where you do need to be the stable, steady hand to keep people calm and like that everything's going okay. But at the same time, even just yesterday, one of my direct reports, who leads one of my teams, we had our whip, and she just said to me, "How are you?" And it was so nice. And she goes like, "How are you? And how are the kids?" And she was really pushing me to say, what's going on in your world? And I think that's a really powerful thing you can do with people who are more senior to build that influence. And I've always done that with my more senior clients, and they actually really appreciate someone seeing them for the human they are.
Yeah, because we still are dealing or working with humans, right? Like
100%.
You might have more
they
responsibility
had their
or
drama
less.
when they walked out the door, or their kids not
sure.
sleeping, or their parents unwell, or something's going on, and it actually helps you to sort of understand all that's going on in a senior leader's world when you start to see that full picture.
So in terms of influencing, can you tell us about a time that you shaped a decision or changed someone's mind without being the most senior person in that room or in that project?
Yeah, for sure. And look, I know we sort of spent, just talking about my current role, but I think it's, you sort of generously summarized my career earlier. I actually stepped into an HR manager role, which was the lead HR role for the region at the time at Conian, which I think had just become a Mobi at the time. And so I think I had about 3 years experience, but suddenly I'm the lead for the region dealing with all of the senior leaders. And so yes, getting promoted from within gives you some credibility, but I mean, I had 3 years corporate experience. So, it was pretty evident that I was still pretty green. And I think looking back, and particularly if you're in those earlier stages of your career or not the most senior person in the room, there's definitely an art to picking your battles. So, you can sometimes feel like, you might come from a place of advocacy. You might come from a place of wanting to drive change. You might come from a place from wanting to be seen to standing for something. But I think there's real power in when you see that hill that you want to die on,
Yeah.
You're really thoughtful about how you do it. And that means you're articulate, you're objective, and you're really clear, but you hold your line and really stand for why you think that this is a particular topic or decision that you want to influence to go a certain way. And I think particularly in the world of people, and this was something I remember learning in that role, is it can be really easy to become emotive. I see this person's having this experience, and the chances of influencing a business leader with that mindset is less likely. And so it's really about removing the emotion, coming at it from an objective place, presenting a balanced point of view. But when you do have that point that you want to get across, you really stand up for it. It depends on the environment you're in. Obviously, this
Of
conversation
course.
is a bit more steered towards people and talent leaders, but some executives are very pro people, and some don't place weight on those proactive measures that are going to really impact people experience and talent and all of those things. And so you got to pick your audience. But I think if you become that person that's just pushing all the time and never getting your outcome, you're going to struggle to get that influence. But I think really knowing from a values place or a principles place or a broader context, like it's not individualized, this is actually something that impacts a broader group of people. They're the things that you go and, fight the good fight for, but do it in a way that's really articulate and objective.
And do you feel like, it's probably leading the witness a little bit here, but do you feel like you have to sort of not change your values, but shift your style when you're influencing different stakeholders?
Yes.
Yeah.
And, there is still a typical dynamic that a lot of people in HR and talent roles are female, and a lot of people in executive roles are male. And so there are just natural, typical communication preferences that are going to more likely make it that you're just not naturally going to see eye to eye in a conversation. And we shouldn't see that as a bad thing. That's the beauty of diversity. But you really do have to understand your stakeholder and present information or a point of view or a discussion in a way that's going to land with them. It comes down to what you present in a report, what you put on a screen, how you speak, the tone in which you use, the style in which you use. And you are being naive if you think you can just do it your way and that everyone's just going to get on board. So really making the effort to understand who your different stakeholders are, the different contexts they operate within. And the more that you enable that person through what you do, they're going to listen to you back. So you really do have to come at it from a place of, I know the outcome I want, but I'm going to adapt in order to get there. That's not sacrificing. That's not silencing your view, but you have to be realistic. You can't just bang your head against a wall and hope that people are just going to get on board.
Oh, for sure. And do you think that there's we're talking, for context, if we're talking about sort of that HR environment and the executive, do you think that there's one sort of language that cuts through that? On another podcast that we had, we were talking a lot about data and how data can cut. I don't think we use this word, but I think it's applicable here, how data is like a common language at the executive table. And so really, quite often, and this is probably less true now, but historically, HR hasn't always come from a position of higher education. It has, often come from other roles, administrative roles. Less so now, but being able to embrace data to talk a common language that is just, okay, it's hard facts rather than, to your point, I think, that emotive bit, which is part of the story, but you've got to underpin it by data.
I mean, I think I completely agree with that. I also think the more that you can take even something that might be happening at a relatively individual level, but bring it back up to, but this is what it means for the business. So from an HR perspective, if you're talking about a team that's having some challenges with the manager, but for example, maybe that manager is well perceived at an executive level, but not by their team. It's not about saying, well, Bob and Joe and Susie from that team say that this person isn't supporting them and therefore we have a problem. It's about saying, hey, the number one reason that's going to drive attrition is poor manager relationships. We're sensing that that's not working. in order for us to get what we need from this team, which is X, Y, Z, strategic
Yeah.
objective, this is what I think we need to do, but you're presenting a solution. You know, busy execs get defensive if they don't sort of believe or see in the path forward, and it's too hard, we don't have time, deal with it, find a different way. And, you know,
but if I'm the exec and own XYZ and you're telling me that something is downstream is going to impact my XYZ, then I'm all ears, right?
Yes. Yeah. And I think it's having the empathy as well, that like people are just allergic to difficult conversations. And so not leading that with, well, you need to go and talk to so-and-so and give them some feedback. Like the chances are someone may not be up for that. So it's just, it's that art of presenting information in a way. I think you're right on the common language, but once again, there might be different common language for different stakeholders.
Yeah,
so
for
depending
sure.
on how that stakeholder likes to be spoken with or the way in which they like information presented, do it in that way.
Yeah. Okay. And do you, so I'm going off a question here because I love this question. I want to make sure I get it right. But do you think it matters more when it comes to influence being right or being heard? And how do you make sure you're both?
Yes. It's definitely not always about being right, because I think that influence comes from being trusted and having credibility. And I think if you're always dominating to be right, and as I said, choosing to die on every single hill that you see, you can become that sort of
not you again,
dogmatic professional. Everyone's like, oh God, here they come. And so I think that particularly if you are in people or talent role, there are definitely topics and forums where you are the SME and you need to recognize that it probably is the place for you to be right. Now, you don't have to be right in that moment. You can say like, hey, I think that this needs some further thinking. I'm going to go away and think about it. And then there are other forums where you can be heard. And so that might be broader. There might be a broader discussion around strategy, maybe a massive change in the product roadmap or something like that. Now, that is always going to have a flow down on the people, but is it the place that you're going to go and die on a hill on to say, well, you know, like we can't do this right now because that team's just gone through a big change with their manager and they're all going to be super stressed. It's like, well, hang on a second, like we're basically making a decision for this product change for the survival of the business. And I think sometimes that's where the tension point can come from our profession, where people become so connected to the humans and kind of what they're going through in the workplace that we can actually lose sight of the broader commercial context. And so I think it's a dance about knowing when to be right, when to be heard, and also when you don't need to be heard. And it will change constantly, and things might make it change. You might walk into an interaction thinking it's going to be one and then it becomes another, but you definitely don't need to be the loudest and most frequent voice.
Note to self. I tend to be loud, maybe not the most frequent.
That's a bit of an extrovert. You know, I definitely have a issue with silence. Like it makes me feel awkward, and I've really had to say to my team
high five
over the years, like, I'm going to try and stop talking, and like, please, like, nudge me or slack me if I'm not allowing you to speak. I had this amazing employee in the early stages of Charlotte, and she had such great thoughts, but she needed about 20 seconds to kind of like really formulate them. And the silence used to kill me. And so then I'd just start talking, and she actually, full respect to her, pulled me aside and was like, hey, I really want to contribute on this meeting. Can you please give me space? And I was like, yes. And, you know, that was really humbling for me to realize I don't always need to be heard. There's really other, probably better perspectives in the room if I just let them have a chance.
Yeah, it's I struggle with that too, because I do like sound, and I know, like, I try to be a proactive listener, and I really actually have to work at it. I don't have to work at talking at all. Like, that's just going to happen. But I don't imagine I'll ever master that. It's like some people that make me feel like they're listening intently all the time. I'm like, wow, that's amazing.
I know.
You know, I always sort of think, you know, when I go to a barbecue or something where I'm in an environment where I meet new people, and quite often, you know, I'll be in the car with my wife on the way home and go, oh, that Barry, he's amazing. But if I think about it, Barry actually just let me talk.
Yeah.
He listened and I thought he was amazing. It's a really weird thing. I think it's true for most humans. Like, if we feel heard, we feel like, wow, that was really cool. But actually, I just got to talk a lot. It's a strange, maybe it's just me.
But that's a great example, I think, of also where you need to recognize how the way in which you apply influence does change. And so now with, the credibility or the position that I have, my influence is actually when I specifically create an opportunity for someone else to step into the conversation or to have a moment to speak. And I do us no favors if I spend the whole time talking. So then a client's used to me being the one engaging. I guess how we often work is we become quite embedded internally, and some of our projects run for 6, 12 months, even longer. So I sort of get a bit of that mix. And to be honest, I don't think it's that different from when I was in-house as well.
Yeah.
For me, the way in which you influence upwards is to try and create some form of genuine connection. This is what I found has been, I will call it a superpower, where, my team laugh all the time. Like, we walk into meetings and it's all very serious. And the next minute I've just started connecting with someone about something totally random, having a bit of banter. It's not about being disrespectful, but it's about just almost just, as you said, bringing those walls down. There's time and place for things. You can't be seen to be not taking something seriously. But as I said before, I think people are in meetings all day long and they want to have a genuine conversation. And, in the world of consulting and pitching, they are getting approached all the time about things. So they just want to feel like you understand their problem and that you might have a solution that can help them. And I was in a pitch with a potential new client the other day, and I'd already spoken to one of them, and I sort of, look, why don't I bring some of my team in? And they said, look, no, can you just come in? Just kind of want to get a few of the other business leaders sort of comfortable. This is the first time we'd be investing in something like this. And, here I am, still with a big imposter syndrome complex, pitching to two business owners that have run a really successful firm for, I think they've been in operation for like 30 years. And, I sit there and just think, God, I've got things to learn from you, not from them. And, there's a bit of, they're on one side of the table and I'm on the other. And we just got into a bit of banter, and I can't remember now what I said, but, there was something, and I'd just play it back to them and be like, well, I know you asked for this, so let me take it there. And, trying to be less scripted. And this is something I talk about with my team all the time, and they all know it because it drives me kind of crazy. I bring my team to meetings so that they can have that experience and exposure. And they sit there the whole time on their laptops, tap, 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 tap. And I'm thinking, how are you paying any attention to what is actually going on in this meeting? And you're missing the opportunity to actually hear what the person is saying and play back to them so that they instantly, as you said before, feel heard and understood. And I know it's a crutch that we all have. Like, I've got to take notes and I've got to capture it. But I really challenge people to say, no one's expecting you to capture every single thing that's discussed in this 1 hour meeting. But if you're really present and really pay attention to what's the 2 or 3 things that this person's really trying to deal with right now, and you play it back, that is honestly why I think we win so much of the work that we pitch for, because it's less scripting, less big presentations. My team have said multiple times, like, oh, here comes Jess, like she'll derail it. But it leads to the outcome. And so they're sort of willing to go along with the chaos. And so this can't be misconstrued to being not prepared. I'm prepared. I know about the business.
Something I definitely wanted
research. All that kind of stuff. But I think being human and as you said, like, that's where I think that skill of true, genuine, proactive listening can come into it, because you're not worried about what you're saying next. And, oh my God, I've got 15 slides I have to get through, and how am I going to do this? There are so many things you can do. Send a pre-read. Hey, everyone, I'd like you to be really present, particularly around people stuff. Hey, everyone, I know we need to talk about this particular, restructure of this team. I'm going to send around a pre-read. I'm asking all of you to read it so you've got the context. And then I want us to have a really important discussion where everyone can be heard. Like, that is such an influencing move that an HR business partner can do, a head of people and culture, a chief people officer, whatever role you're in, but you just set that tone. So I think being really, really clear that the more that you try to pack into a moment, the more distracting it will be, and the less likely that your audience are going to understand what you're trying to say.
100%. I could not agree with that more. I think I didn't write it down, but I was thinking preparation, like as you were talking about it, I'm like, if you don't prep, then it's very hard to have an influence. And I find the more senior you're trying to influence, the more prep you can give them, the better it will be. So, I'm obviously I'm in sales, so sometimes losing is part of the sale process, and I would much rather lose quickly because I gave some prep and they're like, this is not on my agenda, don't even bother, than waff around and think that there's something there and there's not. Like, there's just no interest to anyone. I feel like an executive specifically will, if they don't know why they're there, they're trying to get out of there of that meeting from the very start. And that's not a nice position to be in. I'd rather be like, hey, Jess, here's what I think we're talking about. Here's some pre-read. And you're like, yeah, cool. Great. Let's go.
And more specific, here are the two things I want us to solve today.
Yeah.
Here are the two, and it's like, that is not being, that is not treating the person like they can't figure it out themselves. You are doing them a favor.
100%.
And I think there is still an experience for a lot of P&C leads where you're the last one on the agenda. You get bumped for a sales meeting. There is that can still happen. You got to roll with it. Okay, look, I know I can't get 2 hours of your time, but I need 30 minutes and this is why I need it. And this is what we're going to solve for. And here's the information I'm going to give you in advance. That stakeholder will be so grateful because once again, you've seen them and you've seen that they're busy and you're being respectful of that. Walking in when they've had back-to-back meetings for 4 days straight and going, right, I want to take you through this strategy deck that they didn't ask for, but you feel like that's your plate. You're not going to get the outcome. And then you end up frustrated. Yeah. And then it all just turns into, and this is where, I talk to so many P&C leads who talk about being a master of your craft or being a strong business partner. And sadly, they can be two different things. And you can't push for being a master of your craft and saying, but we have to roll out this feedback program and we need to uplift our performance framework in this way and we've got to build this capability framework and we've got to do emerging leaders program if that is not what the business needs right now and has the capacity to support. So it has to be, I know that you want to expand into 2 new markets next year, so I think we need to build an emerging leaders program that's going to support cross-cultural communication. Yeah. That is such a different proposal than, well, this is what the market's saying we need to do, so let's do it.
Yeah. It's got to be contextual, right? It's got to really correlate back to the business outcomes. Yeah, for someone, this is probably a little bit a similar question, but I want you to just put it into someone who's early stage in their TA or HR career and wants to build influence. What's a mindset shift that or behavioral change that you recommend they start with? What's something they need to do?
It could be twofold in the sense of, I think there's one around your own mindset to believe you can influence. So that whole, I think a lot of us come from that imposter syndrome place. And so recognizing that you can influence, and then because you're coming from a place that you can influence, then being really thoughtful about the way in which you can do it versus coming from a place of, I don't think I can influence, so I'm just going to throw everything, including the kitchen sink, at this situation and pray that something lands and the experience with your stakeholders is really off. So I think that's one thing that you can do. The other thing I think is honestly is just building rapport and trust with people by small, simple things where you say you're going to do something and then you follow through. And ideally, it's made that person's life easier. Yeah. So, and it can be super small. It could be pre-reads. It could be summarizing the meeting in action steps. It could be scheduling the next follow-up. Just that discipline around. I had an amazing mentor in the early parts of my career, and he used this analogy of who's got the monkey on their back. So you and I are in a meeting and you come to me, I'm the HR manager, you're the people leader, and you're like, I've got this issue with this particular individual and I don't know how to handle it. And you have this great conversation. And then the HR manager says to the people leader, okay, you go away, you have a think about how you want to structure this feedback conversation, you write some notes, then you come back to me, get some feedback from this person, and then the people manager walks out and that monkey is on their back and they're going, great, well, that's the 7th monkey that's been put on my back today and I'm now just feeling super overwhelmed. And they were probably overwhelmed in the first place, which is why they came to you. Now, while I don't think that HR should always hold people's hand, that could be a moment where you just say, why don't I create a template for you to capture the feedback? and I'll email that to you. Like it's not doing the whole thing because that's not what it's about. And they just go, thank you so much. Because it just might be that one thing they need to kick the activity into gear. So I think the more that you can just build like, I'm helpful, I'm pushing it towards the outcome that you need, I'm here to help you solve the problem that you've come to me saying you have, I think is really powerful. And if you just think about how can I enable this person to solve the thing at hand that they've come to me, and you do that regularly, I think that really starts to build up the perception.
Could we call that sort of incremental influence as well? So it's not like if we're trying to influence all the way over to here, but if we're making progress, that's still success, right? Like, obviously you pitch a lot, so do I, and rarely on the very first meeting do we win a deal, or do we influence that person. But quite often what we're trying to understand at the start is we've done our external prep. So we've tried to learn what we can about the situation from an external view. And in our first meetings, we're trying to understand if our external view matches their internal view, what's important to them is, am I coming here to solve this particular problem, or is it a different problem, and what's influencing that? And then I think kind of taking that back, and then any incremental progress we can make on that is progress, right? It's success. We may never actually get to the very end, but we sort of
and the
progress is great.
The goalposts will change. So
for sure.
I think it's incremental trust building, incremental credibility, which is correlated to better influencing. And, I think there could be a lot of in-house people listening to us chat and being like, oh, well, that's more easy for you to articulate because you're in this external position and you're kind of, pitching into businesses. But it's the same internally as
100%.
well. And so really, being clear about how you want to help. It's not to do everything for everyone, because that's that over dependency on HR teams, which we don't want. But doing something, certainly when you're trying to build that credibility and influence early on, is going to have a lot of impact.
Awesome. Jess, that is phenomenal. If there was one little thing that you wanted to leave people thinking about when it came to influence and our topic today, what's the one?
Focus less on the slide decks and the data and the reports, and just focus on having a genuine human interaction with that person. And like that example that you just gave, if you're going to seek funding from someone or approval from someone, rather than spending all your time on building the deck, just go and ask them for a coffee and be like, hey, I really want this to work. What do I need to do? What do I need to know about you and what matters to you in order to put information in front of you that you'll at least consider, and then you can get them talking about, there'll be some sort of personal story that will come out of it, but just don't underplay the power of just a genuine human connection. It'll get you really, really far.
Yeah. Awesome. Hey, really appreciate you coming on. Thanks, Jess.
Thanks for
your time. Awesome.
Thanks, Dave.
Cheers.